Our next speaker is Terry Lodge. He's an attorney that has worked in the nuclear industry and environmental issues and many, many others, and he has a great bio on the program as well. Come on up, Terry. Do you want this like this?
More seats if you guys want to come up and sit around.
Thank you. Thank you for coming up and doing that. How do I just hit down? Oh, space? Yeah. Wow. Good evening. Well, when I haven't worked in the nuclear industry, I've worked against it for about 38 years. Anyway, greetings from Toledo, such as it is. I'm going to talk about, for 10 minutes, and for a lawyer to be restricted to 10 minutes is imposes enormous discipline. I first want to talk about, well, the main thrust of what I'm going to talk about is deregulation. There's a lot of silliness about, a lot of robust breastbeating in Ohio about the toughest fracking regulations in the country and all that. And it is, kindly put, it's hooey, it's nonsense, it is not true. Ohio is, as I was telling a new friend of mine from New Jersey, Ohio is becoming the New Jersey of the Midwest in terms of garbage disposal. And I want to point out that deregulation is really a very inaccurate term. It can actually mean more laws and more regulations. More laws that protect sacred cows or put things out of bounds to regulators, or are created as diversions or window dressings, or are bread and circuses lies. We have, in the 21st century, we've had lobbyists for many, many years, for probably more than a century, probably thousands of years if you go back to ancient Rome. But certainly in the 21st century, the forms of lobbying that are going on are far more sophisticated, corporatist, and highly organized. The American Legislative Exchange Council is one grand example. An awful lot of Ohio law is written and dictated to the General Assembly by lobbyists. So it is the product of lawyers who make more in a couple of weeks than I make in a year. It is the product of bought science to the extent that there's any science involved. Deregulation is not the absence of regulation. It's not the absence of law. Not at all. Norm and Tnorm, I can't get very deeply into these things. Technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive material, TENORM, is, Julie briefly alluded to it. Norm is Tnorm without the TE. It's naturally occurring radioactive material. 80 to 90% of all of the fracking waste is solid or liquid, but is considered to be Norm, naturally occurring. The other 10 to 15 or so percent is Tnorm, and it's technologically enhanced because it's concentrated, it's lumped together, that sort of thing. As you will see, however, the problem is that the General Assembly, in June of this year, amended the statutes very boldly. The black wording does not include drill cuttings, was moved out, drill cuttings were moved out of the Tnorm, the pre-existing law in Tnorm, into essentially Norm. So drill cuttings, which is the vast, vast majority of fracking waste, is now Norm. And as you will see, the General Assembly, being quite an avid collection of magicians, also makes Norm simply disappear. As Julie very nicely suggested, the problem here is not science. The problem here is politics. The problem here is who owns or dictates to the political decision-making process. The problem is that that it costs a bunch of money to try to get rid of, to try to dispose of, in a stable, regulated landfill situation, all of the Tnorm. Let's assume that most of the radioactive fracking waste actually, under mainstream science definitions used by several federal agencies, is Tnorm. It is concentrated. Actually, one of the federal definitions for Tnorm is that when you move it out of place, when you pull it up to the surface, you have just technologically enhanced it. You've moved what was 250 to 350 million years ago, put there, and changed everything. You've brought it to the surface. So the problem here is that it costs $40 to $60 to dump a ton of what is now Tnorm, what is Tnorm really, into a landfill in Ohio, and it costs $6,000 to dispose of it in Utah, or in Belleville, Michigan, or in West Texas, the only 3 places in the country. So what kind of decision do you think these companies make? They make the quick and dirty solution, the decision. There's another problem that is associated, or essentially, Julie alluded to it, that fracking waste is, there's a non-scientific method, which we call downblending, which has been allowed both by House Bill 59, but also by an agreement of the Ohio EPA, the Ohio Department of Health, and the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, whereby the slurry of liquid waste can be mixed with dry material, and if it theoretically would test out at being less than 5 the magic number 5 that Julie was talking about, 5 picocuries per liter, then you can dispose of it in a landfill. Understand how your basic town dump works, folks. You layer waste in for a couple of decades. Each day, perhaps there is some what they call daily cover, but the face, if you will, of the landfill is open for a score of years. It rains, it snows, groundwater seeps through laterally. There's all kinds of water movement in any landfill. And so the problem is that you're basically re-liquefying. That waterborne radium becomes waterborne again. It starts gravitating through gravity to the bottom of the landfill. A lot of it's removed as leachate, not all of it is. You still have a radioactive dump. You also have this phenomenon where landfills, the best engineered landfills of today, have clay and plastic liners. They're very skillfully installed, they're very well engineered, but they leak. They are designed to leak a little bit. Some of them, because of the weight of the garbage, because of a lot of factors, start developing rips and tears. When you start putting a lot of heavy inorganic material like rocks and basically geological stuff into a landfill that was actually engineered for lighter things, you begin to distort the mix, the weight on the liner. So you create additional problems for leakage. So problem is, folks, this is not a true dilution solution, and it simply maintains in some form the radiation that, as Julie suggested, depending on what isotope you're talking about, is going to be around for thousands of years. And it will ultimately get into groundwater. 100% of all landfills, current generation of landfills, will be leaking significantly within a century after they close. A lot of them are leaking while they're open. Beneficial use, Julie also talked about. The black wording is essentially, this is another one of these magical solutions. All of a sudden, something that's hundreds of millions of years old and radioactive is simply too beneficial to let go. So at the OSR facility, and no doubt at others to come, we will be reconstructing or walling off cells that were not well designed 50, 60, 100 years ago, trying to supposedly stop their seepage, but using a wall of radioactive material to accomplish it. Earl had to die, really, but I used Norm. This is one of the most troubling aspects of House Bill 59. And let me tell you, House Bill 59 was a budget bill. It was a 2,820-page law that includes, among other things, changes in the law of criminal rape, changes in the law of spousal abuse, changes in animal cruelty laws, and changes in fracking waste disposal, among many, many other things. The statute here is incredible, because this is what Julie was talking about. There's no record requirement. In fact, there's a statute that says that the Ohio Department of Health cannot require records to be maintained regarding Norm. So Norm, 90% of the fracking waste disappears. 90%. It's radioactive. Some of it is more radioactive than what is placed in low-level radioactive waste landfills, the 3 landfills nationally that I mentioned. My conclusions are pretty straight up. This is a matter of profiteering. It is not a matter of good science. The matter of radioactive fracking waste, because virtually all fracking waste is radioactive, is an enormous, enormous problem. In the old days, when they say they have 60 years of fracking experience, yeah, 60 years ago, there were vertical wells being drilled, and they were using explosive charges at the bottom. They were penetrating shale layers, bringing up pools of gas or oil. Nowadays, as you understand, they drill down for a while and then turn right or left into the shale layers, the very hot stuff. So as probably anywhere from 7 to 10 times as much radioactive waste is being brought up through fracking as was brought up in the old days using conventional drilling techniques. That's why it is a problem. That's why it is an enormous problem. It's very unfortunate that Governor Kasich and the General Assembly think that it's a good business plan. It's a miserable and dangerous business plan. Number 5 is one of my favorite sayings. I bore people with it, but it really is pretty amazing. This is alchemy. This is alchemy, where you are taking material that had to be isolated in order for our life form to develop, and now we're bringing it up to the surface, and somehow you wave a legislative wand, which costs a hell of a lot of money, and it disappears. Thank you.